Hello. Okay, to recap from last week, we talked about the periods of prenatal development from conception to birth, about neurodevelopment from conception to birth. We covered measures of prenatal health, teratogen exposures, the influence of culture on prenatal development. We watched a natural childbirth video, you may remember, discussed the stages of childbirth, and we talked through some considerations for infertility, especially as it relates to therapy. So what I want to do today, I'm going to start talking about newborn life and family adjustment. So I mentioned last week that the hormone oxytocin is secreted at birth in a natural childbirth, and that's the hormone essential in bonding and love. Generally, the baby is placed skin to skin on the mother to facilitate oxytocin production in the baby and promote bonding. But all along in pregnancy, hormonal shifts have been occurring in the mother to prepare her body for birth. For instance, relaxin loosens up her muscles over the course of pregnancy and her ligaments to allow things to move around and prepare for childbirth. So after the birth, the mother is at increased risk of straining, overstretching, or even having a joint injury for up to 5 months after delivery. So it's quite a period of time. Also, in the postpartum period, hormones continue to influence caregiving for the mother. So oxytocin is secreted when she breastfeeds, promoting bonding with the infant. And prolactin is a hormone that promotes the production of breast milk. However, it also influences behavior, metabolism, immune system, and fluids regulation. So there's a fair amount of mood swings after childbirth as well as water retention. And then lastly, estrogens are dialed back down after birth because they tend to interfere with milk production, but that can take a few weeks. So as hormones are adjusting in that postpartum period, there can be moodiness and emotionality related to that. Now, I want to spend a moment talking about breastfeeding. There's a lot of cultural pressure around breastfeeding. How to breastfeed, when to breastfeed, where to breastfeed. So I'd like to start by naming that breastfeeding is difficult for many, and not a lot of new mothers are totally made aware of the challenges of it. So to start, breast milk isn't immediately available for the infant at birth. It can take a few days for a mother's milk to come in, and in the meantime, the mother produces colostrum for the infant to drink, which boosts immunity in those early days. It's full of nutrients. The mother's milk glands are regulated by the demand on them, so the baby nursing and the breasts emptying promotes milk production throughout the whole nursing period. However, the nipple is a very innervated and sensitive area, lots of nerve endings. So the friction of sucking, especially as breastfeeding is established, is often painful at first while the infant and mother learn to breastfeed. And during that time, blisters can occur, as well as bruising and open wounds in some cases. Pain then sharply increases. It is very painful. It's a stabbing pain. But if the mother wishes to continue breastfeeding, she must continue to nurse even through injuries. There are some things like silicone shields that have been created to help with this pain, but in those cases, it takes more time to nurse, and there's concern that the baby will habituate to the shield. So many mothers elect not to use the shield, just to proceed with nursing. There's yeast, which is an infection that could occur on the nipple that causes sort of an outbreak of blisters. It's very common. And mastitis is when you have a plugged duct and can result in flu-like symptoms and be very painful if not cleared. There's also significant time involved in breastfeeding. So at first, breastfeeding takes about 40 minutes and occurs every couple of hours, even through the night. And babies nurse more frequently between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. As the baby and mother get into a rhythm, though, the baby's more efficient, and it can take about 20 minutes for nursing. After a few months, the infant may sleep for up to 4 hours once in a 24-hour period. But for some babies, these longer sleep stretches take up to 8 months to develop. So that's a long time to go with interrupted sleep. Okay, So for moms who are returning to work and who are breastfeeding, they typically elect to pump milk in order to store up extra supply for their return to work. And pumping occurs after the baby feeds in order to empty the breasts and can take up to 20 more minutes. So after that, the pumping supplies, there are tubes and shields that have to be sterilized and stored, as well as bottles. And breast milk has to be labeled and frozen, so there is just some work involved in keeping everything clean and bacteria-free. But that takes time, which means that for up to the first 8 months, new moms who are going to work are sleeping for a maximum of 75 to 80 minutes at a stretch. Having said that, the average sleep cycle is 90 minutes long. And by the way, interrupted sleep, research tells us, is worse on restedness than no sleep at all. So this means that for up to 8 months long, they're having interrupted sleep, immensely interrupted sleep. And I'll talk more on that later. But when moms return to work, they often need frequent breaks to pump during the day, a private space to pump, preferably with a locked door that isn't the bathroom because that's gross, a comfortable chair to sit on, an electrical outlet to plug the pump into. And when you think about it, those spaces can be difficult to come by. In addition, mom needs a place to store her breast milk, and preferably without a comment from other people about the presence of the breast milk. So sometimes the staff refrigerator is an uncomfortable place for that. Okay, next. Nursing breasts are large and become engorged or hard when they're full of milk. And this means that the nursing mother can't be away from her baby for more than 60 to 90 minutes at a stretch, or it becomes painful and engorged. But that also means that errands and exercise, those things are difficult to incorporate into daily routines. At the same time, our culture is pretty obsessed with female appearance, and so there's pressure on new mothers to regain pre-pregnancy body as soon as possible, which is just a difficult added pressure with limited sleep and limited time and limited energy for new moms. And finally, when the exhausted and delirious new mom has to run an errand and get herself and her baby and all of their gear out of their house, she doesn't often have enough time to finish an errand before it's time for the next feed. So rather than exhaust herself and her baby even further, she sometimes elects to breastfeed in places where other people might be. And I like to encourage you that if you see a new mother doing this, in your mind, just cheer her on, understand her struggle, and then just quietly walk by and carry on with your business as though this is normal and fine, and she's a champion for even being outside of her house. Okay, so the next slide. Why, given all of the struggles and difficulty with breastfeeding, why do we do this when it's possible? Well, breastfeeding is the most nutritious option for infants. And so there's a number of immune system reasons why we choose to breastfeed, among other reasons, such as affordability and convenience. But there are also many false assumptions about why breastfeeding is important. And so as to avoid putting undue pressure on new, tired, exhausted parents, I like to just go over some of the breastfeeding research and what is true and what is false about the benefits of breastfeeding. So what is true? Things like ear infections, skin conditions, GI conditions. Certainly we see reductions of those in infants who have been breastfed versus formula fed. But going so far as to say IQ is different, now that is not true. IQ in term infants is not shown to be different whether they were breastfed or bottle fed. There is a reduced type 2 diabetes risk for moms who breastfeed. However, there is not a quicker return to pre-pregnancy weight, whether one breastfeeds or formula feeds. Okay, on to talking about sleeping. I've already mentioned the logistical challenges of sleeping for the breastfeeding new mother. And for all new parents, I wanted to spend some time talking about why sleep is difficult. So it isn't until 4 to 6 months or even longer, up to 8 months even, when babies sleep through the night. And around 4 months is the first opportunity parents have to do sleep training, though they always respond when the infant is hungry or needs a diaper change, of course. Sleep training at this stage means that the parent has, in that moment, met all the basic needs of the infant, whether it's hunger or a diaper change, and they have done some sort of getting to sleep routine, but places the infant in the bed before they have fallen asleep in order to teach the infant to fall asleep on their own, independently. And there's different ways to do sleep training. I like the book Healthy Sleep Habits, Happy Child by Mark Weisbluth. He covers a range of ways to approach sleep training depending on the parent and child needs. And he talks about that around 9 months, there's a social motivation burst for infants where they are waking up to play with you. And at that age, they are just in the middle of the night only. They are the cutest and most adorable beings. Like, they turn on the charm to maximize it. And all day long, you wish they could be that cute and adorable. But middle of the night, they wake up and want to play. And so we have a resurgence of night wakings around 9 months, but with sleep training can get those under control pretty quickly. So finally, a word on co-sleeping. The decision whether to co-sleep or not is a value decision parents will make. Parents who co-sleep get to feeling like that's the only way it should be done, and parents who sleep train get to feeling like that's the only way it should be done. As far as developmental outcomes, I am here to tell you there's no difference, so long as the parent made the decision based on their own values, as opposed to caving or changing their values related to infant crying or stress or demand or other things. Having said that, there are always safety considerations in co-sleeping related to suffocation risk and how exhausted parents are and how deeply they can be sleeping and not wake up. But there are safety measures like an attached co-sleeper to the bed that can help reduce some of those risks. Okay, remember, new parents are bombarded with unsolicited advice about all things parenting, and sleep is no exception, certainly. So here's an excerpt from a mom blogger summarizing the baby advice she had been given. You shouldn't sleep train at all, before a year, before 6 months, or before 4 months. But if you wait too late, your baby will never be able to sleep without you. College-aged children never need to be nursed, rocked, helped to sleep, so don't worry about any bad habits. Nursing, rocking, singing, swaddling, etc. to sleep are all bad habits and should be stopped immediately. Naps should only be taken in the bed, never in a swing, car seat, stroller, or when worn, like with a wrap. Letting them sleep in the car seat or swing will damage their skulls. If your baby has trouble falling asleep in the bed, put them in a swing, car seat, stroller, or wear them. Use the crib only for sleep and keep it free of distractions. If the baby is having trouble adjusting to the crib, have them play in it first. If the baby wakes up at night and wants to play, put fun toys in the crib to distract them. Put the baby in a nursery, bed in your room, in your bed. Co-sleeping is the best way to get sleep, except that it can kill your baby, so never ever do it. If your baby doesn't die, you will need to bed share until college. Just a mess of conflicting, unsolicited advice is what parents are in for these days. Okay, so on to talking about social and emotional milestones. For social development, we start to see in early infancy social awareness and interest in those early days. So in the beginning, we have shifts in eye gaze and attention. Those are starting to occur around even less than 2 months of age. And then around 2 months, when seeing peers, some arousal and some mutual looking. Social smiling, that's a responsive social smile, responding to somebody else's smile. And if you think about just basic social emotional reciprocity, 2 months of sleeplessness and exhaustion is a long time to go without the social reward of a social smile. So that's a very rewarding time. Vocalizations and cooing can also occur socially starting around 2 months and then reaching. It's not until 6 to 9 months that we start to see reciprocity of gestures like waving and imitating. Those will come a little bit later. And then we start to see a broader range of facial expressions after that time. Okay, and finally, I wanted to talk about self-concept for a moment, this consistent frame of reference that infants will start to develop, this idea that they have a self that's different than the parent or different than other people, that their own thoughts and experiences are different than others. And we start to see that happening around 6 to 8 months. Understanding other people's experiences starts to occur around a year when we can see joint attention happening. That's when they are paying attention to the thing that other people are paying attention to. And rapid awareness between 2 and 3 years of the difference between self and others. We start to see assertion like, I'll do it myself, and wanting to do things independently. Okay, onward to talking about attachment with Bowlby, Ainsworth, and Harlow. So to start, early attachment theory, Bowlby believed that children come into the world biologically pre-programmed to form attachment with others. We see some example of imprinting by Lorenz, who studied ducklings and removed them from their mother shortly after birth and had them imprint. That means become attached to him, the researcher, instead. And so as they attached to him, they were following him around, and we see some footage of that. We also saw some early attachment research by Harlow, who did research on rhesus monkeys. He had baby rhesus monkeys, and he gave them an option within their cage of a fake mother, a fake wire mother, wire-framed mother, and a wire covered with a softer terry cloth cover. Only the wire mother was the mother where they got fed. So they had to get food from the wire mother. But interestingly, all the other times the monkeys preferred to cling on to the terry cloth mother, which gave us some information about the importance of early attachment. So it's not just physiological need that drives maternal attachment. It's not just mother's milk. It's actually love and connection and emotional need as well. And so that's how we started to know that there is capacity for attachment and some critical periods in early life. Early maternal deprivation in these studies, removing them from mothers early, could be reversed if their time away from their mother was less than 3 months, which for humans, that the equivalent is estimated at less than 6 months.
Let me show you a monkey raised on a nursing wire mother. Now here are 106's 2 mothers. As you can see, it was weaned on a wire mother. Here's baby 106. Watch.
He's going to the wire mother.
He's got to eat to live.
he's going back.
He's back on the cloth mother, and he'll stay on the cloth mother. Actually, this baby spends from 17 to 18 hours a day on the cloth mother and less than 1 hour a day on the wire mother. We had predicted that the variable of contact comfort would be a variable of measurable importance, but we were unprepared to find that it completely overwhelmed and overshadowed all other variables, including those of nursing.
Frankly, Doctor, if it comes to a choice between wire and cloth, it's reasonable to expect that any child will go to the cloth. It's a matter of creature comfort, like a baby with its blanket. But is this really love?
Well, what do you mean by saying that a baby loves its mother? Certainly one thing we mean is that it gets a great feeling of security in the presence of the mother. Now, Mr. Collingwood, wouldn't you say that if you frightened a baby, that it went running to its mother, was comforted, and then all the fear disappeared and was replaced by a complete sense of security that that baby loved its mother? Now, in this experiment, this is the apparatus we use.
That looks diabolical.
That's just the way the baby monkey feels about it. Flashing eyes, loud sound, moving mechanical parts, all of these things are designed to frighten a monkey. Now here we have a peaceful, resting baby monkey. Let's find out what his reactions to his mother are when we frighten him.
He's scared, all right.
And he does what any child will do in a similar situation.
He runs away.
It's more than running away. He was running to his mother, to touch her, to drive away his fear. Contact with the mother changes his entire personality. Look, now he's actually threatening the diabolical object. All right. This gives us part of the picture of the strength of infantile love. This is a 6-foot square room with a few toys and other objects. But to the monkey, it's much more menacing. We know that when our own children are taken to a strange place without their mothers, they are often overwhelmed with fear. This room is just such a new and strange environment for the baby monkeys. No mother is in there. Now, let's put a monkey into the room. Notice how cautiously he enters the room. He's searching for comfort, but nothing relieves his disturbance. Now we'll take the baby monkey out and put in a wire mother.
Now, this one was nursed by a wire mother.
That's right, all his life.
She doesn't seem to help much.
Now, we'll try the same test with a cloth mother in the room. You see the contrast in the behavior? Despite the fact that the wire mother nursed him, she could offer this infant nothing in the way of affection or security. But here the monkey, by rubbing against the cloth mother, as if he were seeking as much contact comfort as he could get, builds up his reservoir of affection and security. First, his body relaxes as the fear disappears. But above and beyond this, new positive response patterns appear. He now goes out to explore and investigate this new, strange world. He is now a normal, happy, curious baby.
Of course, there's some difficulties with generalizing animal research to humans, but it's not a study we would want to see in humans for obvious reasons. Okay, Schaefer and Emerson talked about some stages of attachment and the development of attachment. Talked about indiscriminate attachment in infants less than 4 months. So these are young babies who will just let anybody hold them. They don't show a clear preference for caregiver until about 4 to 7 months, when they start to have a preference for certain people. And then 7 to 9 months, a special preference for their primary caregiver. And then we start to see the emergence of stranger fear, separation anxiety around that time. And then over 9 months, they start to build the capacity for multiple attachments and increasing their independence and ability to be separate. Now, how on earth do we measure attachment? That's where Ainsworth's research came into play. So Ainsworth did a study where she had toddlers had parents bring them in, separate from them for a couple of minutes, and then parents returned, and she measured how did the toddler respond when their parent returned. So guessing that it was stressful for them to be away from their parent, how did they respond to their parent at return? And that is how she began to measure attachment. So there were different kinds of responses. There was secure attachment, and that was about 65% of the time, and that was associated with sensitive, responsive parenting in general. Insecure, resistant, or ambivalent attachment happened about 15% of the time. That was when the child was distressed when the caregiver left, and they were not comforted at the return of the caregiver. And that has to do with parenting patterns of responding inconsistently to the child. Insecure avoidant attachment was not showing when the child did not show distress when their caregiver left, and also did not acknowledge the return of the caregiver, so just avoiding altogether. And that had some correlation with dismissive, unresponsive, or uncaring parenting behaviors. So later, Maine is a researcher who identified a disorganized or disoriented type of response in attachment. Talked about no attaching behaviors, often like dazed, confused, or apprehensive almost in the presence of the caregiver. And that had to do with parents who had abusive or neglectful or frightening parenting styles. So next one. So lots of the time, research on primary caregivers is done on mothers. So what do we know about fathers? Attachment with fathers also matters. So there are similar reactions to infants at birth for fathers. There are hormonal changes and shifts that fathers have regarding testosterone, estradiol, cortisol, and prolactin, all of these hormonal changes happening for fathers. And there are also postnatal mood swings for fathers related to hormones as well. And what about reactive attachment? What is reactive attachment? This is when early attachments are broken. So related to early attachment theory about safety of the world, think back to the Bucharest study where infants were learning about, is this world a safe place to be? If I cry, will there be a response? Will I get my needs met? Things like that. When attachments are broken in early childhood or infancy, and those formative early attachments, the infants don't have access to those caregivers anymore. We can start to see patterns of reactive attachment. So this occurs when there are multiple early caregivers that shift, and there's broken attachments in there. I like to specify, and that's what this picture is about. This is from the show Sister Wives, where it's a polygamist LDS family, and there are multiple mothers in the family. That the issue conceptually is not that there are multiple caregivers, it's that the issue with reactive attachment is that there are broken attachments. So that ostensibly would be less disruptive than a series of foster homes or a series of partners or things like that in those early days. There's certainly a need for stability in relationship and attachment in those early days. Finally, I want to give a word about the importance of parents teaching coping. So attachment is important and essential. And so I encourage responsive parenting, that is responding to the infant when they're crying or fussing or if they have needs. Now, having said that, sometimes you've got to boil some pasta for dinner. You've got to handle this boiling pot of water before it boils over, for instance, and you have to set the baby down. Whether they're crying or not, you just need to set them down for a second so as not to burn the infant with boiling hot water. So there are times in infancy where needs go unattended to for a period. That one, a safety example. In the context of thousands of interactions where the parent was responsive all throughout the day, that is relatively minimal impact. Sure, it's some cost, but it's relatively minimal compared to the thousands of other responsive interactions that they had. So the same goes for ideas about teaching coping and self-calming. So when kids are learning, when toddlers later on are learning self-calming, and parents are having to use timeout, or they're having to use relax time, or they're having to ignore tantrum behavior, I like to remind them that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of other interactions where you're responsive. And so, yes, there is an attachment cost when we're ignoring misbehavior, but in the context of responsive parenting, a majority of the time, there's minimal impact from that, from those moments of formative teaching. Okay, finally, I want to show you this still face experiment. This has to do with when social cognition is coming online in infancy. So infants sense some relationship between facial expression and emotion. They can even mimic it, and they use the other to regulate their own emotion and attention to some extent. So this is the still face experiment. It's just showing some demonstration of the importance of parent responsiveness with infant emotional regulation.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
Okay, on to culture and attachment. So this older meta-analysis from 1988 was one that took Ainsworth's work and applied her work of the strange situation experiment in other countries. And so the meta-analysis is combining the results of other studies from other countries using strange situation. What the findings were in the meta-analysis were that China had the lowest percentage of secure attachments. Great Britain had the highest percentage of secure attachments. That individualistic countries had a higher likelihood of anxious avoidant attachment, and collectivist countries had a higher likelihood of ambivalent resistant attachment. So I bring all this up in this very old meta-analysis to mention some of the cultural limitations of this procedure, and hopefully you are immediately thinking that and recognizing that there are some cultural reasons why we can't take a attachment measure established in the US and apply it universally across the world. So these outcomes may reflect differences in the way that infants are perceiving the strange situation rather than real differences in attachment. So, for instance, in Israel, children raised in kibbutzim rarely meet strangers, and so their resistant behavior during the strange situation may have had more to do with heightened fear or anxiety responses than with the nature of the maternal bond. Japanese results could have been skewed because in many cases, Japanese infants are not separated from their mothers, nor does Japanese culture value independence and independent exploration at the same level that Western cultures do. So otherwise securely attached babies might just explore less. All right, on to talking about primary caretakers, specifically depressed primary caretakers. Maternal mental health is important, and it's why screening is done for postpartum depression and maternal mental health in even well child visits. So maternal depression in early years leads to lots of things, right? We already know it's a stressful time in newborn life, and maternal depression has an impact on the responsivity of the mother to the baby. And so we know that with lots of attachment research is related to responsivity. That's what I was talking about earlier. So when there's maternal depression in the early years, there's increased risk for child social emotional difficulties and later psychopathology, likely related to attachment as a mediator. Also has a negative impact on self-concept, but attachment did mediate the relationship between depression and self-concept. So that tells us that attachment was a mediator in between depression and self-concept for at least one sample. Okay, well, that's it for content for today. I will wrap it up there and see you soon.